The world is very ancient, and human origins are mysterious and obscure. We try to decipher our past based upon the multiple layers of civilizations whose ruins lay strewn across the planet like pieces of an archaic jigsaw puzzle. Some of these old civilizations are still buried beneath the deserts, mountains, and oceans, awaiting a time when they will yield their secrets through human discovery or natural cataclysms that will strip away and reveal their hidden locations. In the unique perspective on history that will be explored in this series, the case for a vaster chronological perspective of history will be investigated, based upon ancient sources hitherto unrecognized by the majority. With limited tools at the disposal of modern sciences, history has been abbreviated into a narrow band that does not sufficiently explain the vast time periods needed to evolve the human form and human consciousness. Deep in our racial memory or collective consciousness lurks the legends and myths of lands and continents that once existed, such as Lemuria and Atlantis. Fabulous stories abound of advanced cultures with their arts and technologies that have risen to great heights and then fallen back into the dust of history once again. Understanding these rhythms and cycles of time help us to understand that our modern civilizations are not the first to have emerged, nor are they necessarily more advanced than previous ones that have come and gone. This new approach to history challenges the way we think about the past based upon our cultural, religious, and educational conditioning. These structures have helped humanity thus far understand the world, but which in today's rapid acceleration of planetary consciousness are very limited and starting to break down. They are overdue for transformation into a broader, more inclusive vision. The possibility of discovering and understanding the origin of the human soul and its divine pedigree is imminent in our time. We stand before a doorway leading to planetary illumination upon the greatest mysteries of life, the hidden history of humanity.
The intention of the Hidden History of Humanity project is to re-establish the correct chronology and timelines for human history. That's part of it. The other part of it is that humanity is disempowered in not knowing its true origins or indeed the chronology. So to establish the correct chronology and the understanding of the root races, how humanity came into being, and how the evolution of consciousness proceeded from there, is going to empower humanity with knowing the truth. Humanity is having the truth hidden from it at this point in time, but it is actually emerging. We have light emerging, we have truth emerging, and this is happening exoterically in parallel with this esoteric emergence of the ageless wisdom teachings.
Part of the intention of the Hidden History of Humanity series is to present a chronological sequence of history that demonstrates the evolution of consciousness by humanity, the mystery of when the human soul came into existence and its purpose. This first series will establish a broad structure of understanding for the future series that will elaborate further. Evolution will be traced from before the human race appeared through the stages of the Lemurian, Atlantean, and current root races. It will finish with contemporary humanity that is now transitioning into the sixth root race. It will discuss the evolution that will unfold in the future, always in the context of what has transpired. It has been said that unless we understand our history, then we are condemned to repeat the mistakes of the past. On the scientific side, several key areas will be explored in this history of the root races, such as geology, geography, astronomy, archaeology, and anthropology. From the religious angle, some of the most ancient works will be referenced: the Hindu, Jewish, Persian, Islamic, Buddhist, Gnostic, Celtic, and Christian traditions. Investigating the hidden history of the world means that we must return to discover the birth of the solar system, of which our Earth is but one participant. Stupendous questions will be explored as to how this solar system came into existence with its subsequent planetary schemes, chains, rounds, and globes.
Modern science insists upon the doctrine of evolution. So does human reason and the secret doctrine. The idea is corroborated in ancient legends and myths, and even by the Bible when it is interpreted esoterically. We see a bud slowly developing from a seed and a flower from the bud. But what of the seed with its predetermined program of physical transformation? What about the invisible, therefore spiritual forces which gradually develop its form, color, and perfume? The word evolution speaks for itself. The origin of the present human race pre-existed in its parent race as a seed, in which lies hidden the flower of the next race. The ancestors of the present elephant and lizard may have been the mammoth and the plesiosaurus. Why should not the originators of our human race have been the giants described in the ancient Hindu Vedas or the book of Genesis? There are several keys to the mysteries, past, present, and future, of the 7 great root races and the 7 great cycles. Every symbol and allegory is said to have 7 keys, the 7 keys to the entrance of the door of the mysteries, and that each key must be turned 7 times.
Well, the ageless wisdom has been called the perennial philosophy as well. It's ageless because it's timeless. It's the same verities and truths that exist throughout all time. And the ageless wisdom teachings come to us in many forms, through mythology, through various amanuenses who have been transmitters of the teachings from the hierarchy of the masters of wisdom, through the ancient Vedas, of course, through the spiritual traditions that exist universally. These various frequencies of the ageless wisdom teachings are available for people to plug into at whatever level of understanding that they have reached thus far in their soul evolution.
There are several other keys to this study that include psychology, physiology, metaphysics, astrology, and sacred geometry. The synthesis of even a few of these keys will shed light upon the evolution of consciousness in the human kingdom, the purpose of the human soul, and its existence. For many, to be told that the age of thinking humanity is around 18.6 million years may invite some disbelief or even derision and ridicule. Such is the state of Maya, or illusion, in which we all live, conditioned by thousands of years of wrong thinking, religious propaganda, ignorance, and lack of spiritual education. The somewhat overdeveloped concrete mind of humanity in this fifth root race is a particular liability, in that it does not recognize the subtle so easily, only that which is tangible. History, with its many evidences of past civilizations, is in a tangled and confused state. Humanity's approach to our past has imposed upon itself the limitations of dogmatic science and theology, ignoring the ancient traditions that hold the keys to many of these riddles. We live in a time of the approaching astronomical cycle of Aquarius, where the ancient mysteries will be reinstated after thousands of years of being hidden from the eyes and ears of the profane. Humanity stands at the doorway of initiation into the mysteries of history and higher consciousness. There are many isolated strands in history that can be drawn together. There are many facts that can be collated, especially those corroborated by direct as well as inferential evidence found in ancient literature and history. This is one of the fundamental purposes of the Hidden History of Humanity Project's books and video series. Much of this ancient literature is contained within the Hindu Puranas, the Upanishads, the Rig Veda, the Mahabharata, and the Ramayana. This is logical, for the Hindu tradition is the oldest of our current races. In the Puranas, the meaning and chronological order is very clear. We can count generations of the Manus and their series of incarnations as heroes in the old stories. The Manu sets the tone and type of any given race in terms of its evolutionary goal. The ancient book of Manu gives a complete narrative of creation with a chronology of the divine ages of the heroes through to the appearance of man on earth. Likewise, in the Egyptian tradition, all the lists of past kings were recorded carefully, documenting races and subraces reaching right back into ancient Atlantean and Lemurian history. The most recent references to our current fifth root race also come to us from the Old Testament, where the history of all the human races is contained in the first 6 chapters of Genesis. Much of this will also be explored in this series. Genesis, from chapter 4, verse 16, through to the end of the 5th chapter, gives purely historical facts taken word for word from the secret book of Numbers in the Great Oriental Kabbalah. The patriarchs of the Old Testament, such as Adam, Cain, and Seth, are the same as the Hindu Manus who set the tone, impulse, and purpose for each evolution in the root races, sub-races, and branch races.
The Book of Revelation, chapter 17, verse 10, has preserved a tradition that speaks of the 7 races, where there are 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come.
This passage refers to the 5 root races that have elapsed, including our 5th root race that is almost finished. That which is not yet come refers to the coming 6th and 7th root races. Interpretation of the Bible, both in the New and Old Testaments and based upon the secret sciences, has yet to be fully exposed with its many allusions to the septenary constitution of earth and man, to the 7 major cycles or rounds and the 7 root races. The ancient Greek tradition was also a repository of the ageless wisdom, encoded throughout its wonderful and deeply evocative mythology. The Greek allegories give to Atlas 7 daughters, representing the 7 subraces of Atlantis. These daughters are the mothers of famous heroes, the founders of many nations and cities. Astronomically, Atlas's daughters are the 7 Pleiades. The 2 are connected with nations whose destinies are shaped by the past events of their early lives according to universal karmic law. In the Greek tradition, the root races are divided into the Golden, Silver, Bronze, and Iron Ages, and have an identical correspondence to the Hindu Yuga cycles, such as the Kali and Satya Yugas. The 3 one-eyed giants of Greek mythology are a reference to the last subraces of the Lemurian root race. Hence, we can see the sources of the ageless wisdom or perennial philosophy that lay hid in universal mythology and religion. The same or similar stories are told in all cultures, indicating the consistency and veracity of these ancient stories within the collective consciousness of humanity.
Mythology is one of the great keys to studying the mysteries, because the mysteries are encoded in mythology, in Greek mythology, in Scandinavian mythology, in mythology of all traditions. Like music, mythology is one of the great universal languages that we can understand and which anyone can tap into quite easily for understanding the archetypes of the gods that are described in the various stories. In mythology, we have the stories of all the planets and their relationship to one another, personified by the planetary gods. We have Zeus, Jupiter, and Mars, and Venus, and Mercury. They all have these various stories which describe their interrelationship with one another. The ancient wisdom teachings are encoded in all mythologies, East and West.
The secret history of the world is revealed in many traditions, the duration of which far surpasses the minuscule figures used in modern times. In the denial or ignorance of its true origins lies the source of disempowerment for humanity, in not knowing its divine source, the nature of the human soul, and the very lengthy evolution of human consciousness. Who today really reflects about our true history and ancient past, preoccupied as we are in a busy world trying to survive? Most people accept the culturally conditioned views of the Western Bible and/or modern science, both of which do not, on the average, offer more than 5,000 to 10,000 years for the origin of human civilization. However, this is changing in some fields of science, going back into hundreds of thousands or millions of years in some cases. In our current fifth root race, resonant with 5, the number of mind, there has been achieved a perfection, refinement, and quintessential expression of the concrete mind. Although this has brought many benefits in science and technology, its shadow expression via the critical mind tends to be separative at the expense of the love principle. The lower mind only functions through the 5 tangible senses. In the coming Aquarian cycle, the secret sciences will blend more fully with mainstream science. The 6th sense, or intuition, is in its early stage of development in this imminent 6th root race, hence perception of the more subtle aspects of human evolution, such as the aura, chakras, and the invisible forces behind nature, is still limited, unrecognized, and unrealized by the majority. With regard to our history, there are many crystallized belief systems that influence current world thinking. They are compounded by an unquestioning and undiscriminating acceptance under the authority of modern science or religion. Likewise, history tends to stay in a straitjacket of conformist, consensus thinking that excludes any other viewpoints. This is changing, however, almost imperceptibly, as inquirers from many disciplines are questioning existing viewpoints of the status quo. They are uncovering more and more evidence that will continually transform current thinking. This Hidden History of Humanity project series is part of this incoming wave, expanding our worldview, pushing us ever forward in our evolution. There is one boundless, immutable principle, one absolute reality which antecedes all manifested conditioned being. It is beyond the range and reach of any human thought or expression. The manifested universe is contained within this absolute reality and is a conditioned symbol of it. Our planet and the whole cosmic scheme with its suns, constellations, galaxies, and attendant planets are part of one great cosmic plan whereby ever-increasing expansion of consciousness occurs. The Buddha said, "Veil after veil will fall, but veil after veil remains." The cosmos is ever expanding. Speculation on the intelligences and hierarchical orders of worlds is evident in many traditions. One can only ponder on the rich diversity of life within this living cosmos. All of these factors inform us that we cannot possibly be the only form of creative intelligence in this vast panorama of worlds. And humanity is coming to this gradual realization and imminent revelation in fact. The Earth incarnates over many vast cycles called rounds or manvantaras in the Hindu parlance. These cycles pour through the various so-called globes, chains, and schemes of Earth evolution.
The rounds are enormous periods of time, and there are 7 rounds that correspond to each planetary incarnation or globe of the so-called planetary logos. And we are currently in the 4th round of 7 rounds at the moment. And this has brought about an elapsed time of around about 1.93 billion years. We are halfway through this globe period. And these rounds are broken up into 2 other lesser cycles of 317 million years each, and these are called manvantaras. Manvantara, though, can be a generic name applied to any cycle. It literally means between 2 manus, and the manu is the being who sets the archetype for any particular race. So these 7 rounds are opportunities for the incarnating monads of the planet to gain experience by incarnating upon these streams of energy, which we call rounds, and subsequently find their incarnation into the various root races, sub-races, and branch races.
In this diagram of the Earth scheme are 7 large circles called chains. Within each of these large circles are 7 smaller circles called globes. The planets are called schemes because behind the visible outer planet are a series of worlds in more subtle matter called globes and chains. A planetary scheme holds within it the microcosm of the entire solar system. Our planetary logos, which is the ensouling entity of our physical Earth, undergoes many incarnations, which are called globe periods. There are 7 globes that are contained in a chain of globes. These 7 chains in a scheme make a total of 7 times 7 equal 49 globes. They represent past and future incarnations of the life we call a planetary logos, or God, upon our planet. Note that the current incarnation of the Earth is chain number 4, the central chain of the 7 chains. The 3rd chain is also called the moon chain, a previous incarnation of the Earth, for which our moon today is a remnant and reminder.
So the rounds and globes and chains refer to the greater picture of evolution. So if we're considering the whole solar system as an incarnation of the great life that emanates from Sirius, then we can get into a little bit more detail within the solar system. Every planet in the solar system is regarded as a planetary scheme, and within that scheme exists the globes and the chains of each particular planetary scheme, which is a microcosm of the entire solar system. So various globes and chains within the Earth scheme are named the Neptune chain or the Venus globe and so forth. And of course, all these planetary schemes within the solar system are connected to one another.
In time and space today, our Earth scheme is currently in the 4th globe of the 4th chain, about halfway through its evolution. It is now in the 25th globe, or incarnation of a total of 49 globes in the Earth scheme. A globe period lasts for 4.32 billion years.
The solar system as a whole is said to be at the middle point of its evolution, but on a much larger scale of some 155 trillion years. The Yuga cycles have been described as symbolic by many modern scholars, but they are also literal in terms of time measurement. These are stupendous time scales, yet if one seriously studies and reflects upon the ancient Hindu yugas, it will be found that they have an innate beauty and truth that transcends our modern measurements of time.
The law of periodicity is basically the science of cycles. So periodically, these cycles recur over periods of time, they repeat, but they repeat on different turns of the evolutionary spiral. So we have cycles of the rays, we have cycles of the planets, and we of course have cycles of the zodiac. We have the precession cycle of the zodiac every 25,920 years. So we have many, many wheels within wheels to study in the science of cycles, and it can get very confusing. The Yuga cycles of the Hindu tradition are based upon the precession cycle of the sun going through the zodiac. So we have a 2,160 years cycle of the sun precessing through Aquarius, through Pisces, and so forth. And if we multiply the 2,160 years cycle by 2, we get 4,320, which Blavatsky tells us is a magical cipher that we can use to calculate some of these cycles called the yugas.
Here is a simple representation of the proportion of the 4 yugas that comprise a Maha Yuga, or Great Wheel. The lesser yugas, or wheels, are the wheels within wheels. The yugas above describe the 4 yugas of this current 5th root race that started almost 4 million years ago, starting with the Satya Yuga and moving clockwise through the lesser yugas to finish at the Kali Yuga that started around 3000 BC.
Humanity has required eons for physical and mental development to evolve into its relatively sophisticated modern state. What do you think? Have you ever wondered just how long it has taken human evolution to unfold? Have you accepted what you were told at school or believed what adamant biblical scholars have declared? Or have you gone along with modern science's authority? How can we consider a longer time frame for history which ultimately conceals the greatest puzzles of existence and the mystery of the human soul? When the traditions of the most ancient cultures are consulted, we find, for instance, that the Hindu Tamil calendar, known as the Tirukanda Panchanga, gives the beginning of our strictly human evolution in this cycle at around 18.6 million years. These cycles also go back into trillions of years, and the Mayans have documented them in the billions. Are these figures fanciful, symbolic, or factual and literal? Although there are paradoxes about certain timescales between ancient sources and modern science, there is agreement about some of the really big cycles. For instance, noted scientist, the late Carl Sagan, said,
"The Hindu religion is the only one of the world's great faiths dedicated to the idea that the cosmos itself undergoes an immense, indeed an infinite, number of deaths and rebirths. It is the only religion in which time scales correspond to those of modern scientific cosmology. Its cycles run from our ordinary day and night to a day and night of Brahma, 8.64 billion years long, longer than the age of the Earth or the Sun. Physicist Fritjof Capra, in his best-selling book, wrote, "This idea of a periodically expanding and contracting universe, which involves a scale of time and space of vast proportions, has risen not only in modern cosmology, but also in ancient Indian mythology. Experiencing the universe as an organic and rhythmically moving cosmos, the Hindus were able to develop evolutionary cosmologies which come very close to our modern scientific models."
Revitalizing the truths of this existing paradigm of the science of cycles is another purpose of the Hidden History of Humanity project. It is an inherent part of the ancient wisdom of several cultures, part of our racial memory that we can all intuitively tap into, recognize, and understand. The key is to experiment with these laws by not dismissing them out of hand. Inquirers in their specific disciplines may find a great expansion of understanding through the application of the law of cycles. All cycles take place to a lesser degree within the time span of the so-called 7 root races, whilst a far vaster reach of time encompasses the globes, chains, and schemes. Humanity is somewhat disempowered in not understanding its past, which is the origin and purpose of the human soul. Also, there has not been a fixed time from which to reckon, by which to measure history. And saddled with the shortened chronology that is supposed to explain the entire unfoldment of the human race, a distorted reality has been created. The spiritual path is one of forever peeling back layers of illusion, and the mystery of human evolution is one of the greatest secrets yet to be fully revealed. As noted earlier, modern science and the secret sciences roughly concur on some of the big cosmic cycles. Yet it is ironic that in the time scales for the sciences, such as archaeology and anthropology, there is required a huge addition of time for the birth of civilization, from 3000 to 4000 BC back to 18.5 million years. Equating the esoteric record of time with the current accepted geological record, there is a massive subtraction of time, from around 65 million years for the Jurassic Age down to 28 to 20 million years for the esoteric doctrine. The big dinosaurs may well have existed 65 million years ago, yet the esoteric doctrine states that the reptile extinction was closer to 20 million years ago. Disparities and contradictions abound, yet they are not unresolvable or irreconcilable. Consider that around 500 years ago, it was thought that the sun orbited the Earth and that the Earth was flat. Now, that illusion has been stripped away and transcended thanks to the astronomer Copernicus. Yet despite all the amazing scientific advances since then, accompanied by expansions of human consciousness with regard to Earth's true history, in some ways, we still live in relatively medieval times. Now, humanity's next phase of penetrating the veil of Maya is to understand just exactly how old it is. Time is an illusion. Yet just as a human being has its allotted lifespan, so do all other lives, plants, solar systems, galaxies, races, civilizations, and nations. All entities, therefore, have a measurable cycle in which to achieve certain goals in their evolutionary pattern. Esoteric cycles are based upon the astronomical precession of the Earth orbiting the Sun. It takes 2,160 years for the Sun to precess through one sign of the zodiac. From here, all the greater cycles are measured.
In this simple table, the chronology of science is on the right-hand side, whilst the chronology of the secret sciences is on the left. The figures are in millions of years. Even though there are large disparities between the figures, when more understanding of the process of dating the Earth is acquired, these figures will concur with one another. In this table, we can see that the astronomical precession cycle of 2,160 years is the basis for all the greater cycles, of how 12 of these cycles create a great year of 25,920 years, of how multiples of the 4,320 cycle create the figures of the Hindu yugas. And then as we move down the table, we can see how these yugas mathematically compose the Mahayugas and the Manvantaras, or rounds. Eventually, a day of Brahma is reached, delineating the time for an entire globe period, or one incarnation. In each globe incarnation of Earth, there are 7 major cycles of evolution, also called rounds. The rounds are composed of 2 cycles each, called Manvantaras, that total 14 in all. The rounds are cycles wherein the life wave of human spirits incarnate through a planetary scheme and its chains and globes. This human life wave experiences life in all kingdoms, starting with the mineral, vegetable, animal, human, and finally the kingdom of souls.
What is our purpose as spiritual monads to embark upon such a long journey through all the kingdoms? Part of the answer to this mystery is to evolve and grow, and to bring evolution upon Earth to perfection, eventually to the status of a so-called sacred planet. This has ramifications for the greater life of the solar system and its own evolution as a whole. We can see, therefore, the inseparability of ourselves from the great Creator and all kingdoms in nature, for they are all modes of expression for this great being to redeem, purify, and transform into higher consciousness, thereby eventually joining a greater evolution with the other planets in the solar system.
Now, the rounds are the cycles of time of the various groupings of monads that cycle through the globe and chain of a particular scheme. The rounds extend for a period of 617 million years, and they are composed of two manvantaras, which are 308 odd million years each. And so there is a certain in-breathing and out-breathing of these manvantaras, or cycles of time.
In each of the great cycles we call rounds, there are 7 root races. Combined with the 7 rounds, this makes a total of 7 times 7, or 49 root races in a globe period. As above, so below. Just as we explored the 49 globes of the planetary scheme, so this evolution is reflected in the 49 root races in just one globe period. These rounds and root races provide the physical body of incarnational experience for our Earth Logos. Human souls are light cells within this greater body of God. Within each root race are 7 subraces, and within each subrace are 7 branch races. 7 times 7 times 7 equals 343 races, all with their allotted cycles, providing a highly diversified human expression throughout the ages. The branch races, in their turn, give birth to the nations.
A root race is a planned unfoldment of consciousness, where a certain archetype is created by the so-called Manu of the races, and various civilizations unfold within that particular time period of a root race, which of course encapsulates 7 subraces and 7 branch races within each subrace, giving many, many different incarnations and possibilities of civilizations, and of course all the soul groupings, the 7 ray soul groupings, who incarnate through those particular branch races and subraces and root races to gain experience, and of course all aim towards enlightenment and liberation ultimately.
Hence the nations that come and go are the leaves upon this tree of life. They have their autumns and springs and constitute the shortest cycles of a few thousand years. The smaller branches that support the leaves are the branch races with cycles that correspond to a 26,000-year precession cycle. The larger branches embody the much larger cycles of the subraces. The trunk of the tree represents the largest cycle embodied by a root race. All the races and subraces that evolve are seeds for the next level of evolution. All races and subraces have a long overlap, so whilst one race is unfolding, it will give birth to another distinct race that will unfold on a partially parallel timeline. Although this is a two-dimensional diagram, we can think of time and evolution as spiralic. The root races started around 150 million years ago, during the latter part of that immense cycle we call the 4th round. The first 2.5 human races were in the subtle or etheric realm, and gradually evolved into a physical form with skin and bones in the middle of the 3rd root race of Lemuria. Human bodies were enormous in those times, but through development of the mental principle, became smaller and more refined.
Halfway through the 3rd or Lemurian root race, in the precise evolutionary cycle, a magnificent preordained spiritual event occurred on earth. It was the coming of the Lords of Flame, who imparted the spark of mind to humanity. This was a humanity who were hitherto only members of the animal kingdom, with animal instinctual awareness and in reality no mind. This period is known as individualization, and it is where Earth's greatest mysteries lay hidden. The Lords of Flame are also known as Kumaras and emanated from an evolution from within the Earth scheme called the Venus chain. It was an evolution associated with Venus, but not from the planet Venus per se. Remember, each planet is a scheme of chains and globes, which are a microcosm of the great solar system. The planets sing together, creating the music of the spheres, a cosmic symphony. The presence of these 105 Kumaras created a great influx of force, so powerful that a mighty storm raged over the planet, destroying most of the animal kingdom, dinosaurs and humans alike.
The advent of the Lords of the Flame, the electrical storm which ushered in the period of man, was distinguished by disaster, chaos, and the destruction of much of the animal kingdom. The spark of mind was implanted in humanity. The strength of its vibration and the immediate effect of its presence caused the death of the animal form, thus producing the immediate possibility of the newly vitalized soul bodies, vibrating to such purpose that new physical bodies were taken for incarnation.
This individualization period occurred in the third branch race of the third subrace of the third root race, Lemuria, expressed as 333. The number 3 relates to the Universal Mother who births all forms. The individualization process started 21.6 million years ago, the chronology of the secret sciences that pinpoints the death of the dinosaurs. After a few million years, the individualization process for various groupings of humans culminated 18.6 million years ago, with the final registering of this spark of mind. Consciousness was not instantaneously received, like turning on a light switch. Groups of souls needed special attention by the guides of the race in this 3 million year period to fan their spark into a flame. During this period, another miraculous evolution occurred. The future humans, who were hitherto members of the animal kingdom with only instinctual consciousness, were hermaphrodite also. In other words, they reproduced themselves without the aid of any mate. Thus, hermaphrodite humanity gradually transformed into a two-sexed species over this 3 million year period. By the time the process was completed, it corresponded to the completion of the individualization period 18.6 million years ago in the fifth subrace of Lemuria. Male and female then started to reproduce the way humans do today. Adam and Eve in the garden represented this separation of the sexes, whilst the eating of the apple was the gaining of consciousness. This biblical story will be covered in greater detail in this series.
If we study the individualization period, we can find most of the mysteries of humanity are encoded around this time. The period of individualization represented the awakening of humanity, who were previously part of the animal kingdom, unawakened pretty much with animal consciousness at that time. It occurred back in Lemurian times, halfway through the Lemurian root race, and it was kick-started or triggered by the so-called Lords of Flame, who came from an evolution within the Earth scheme. This evolution within the Earth scheme is associated with Venus, but it was not Venus per se. The presence of these beings, these Kumaras or Lords of Flame, created an electrical field around the planet that ended up destroying most of the animal kingdom at that time. And this was probably the true period of the death of the dinosaurs. It was the death of the human forms at that time who were part of the animal kingdom, but they reincarnated after this period with causal bodies or souls. The spark of mind was born. This occurred around about 21.5 million years ago, but it took about 3 million years to fan the spark of mind into a greater flame, so to speak. And over this 3 million year period, humanity became individualized in various ray groupings around the planet. So animal man at the time went from instinctual consciousness to individual self-consciousness. They became self-aware. And this particular period is delineated in Genesis, in the Bible, where Adam and Eve knew each other. This was the time of individualization, sort of more or less mythologically expressed.
This table shows the timeline that corresponds to these subrace events in Lemuria.
Gradually, all the Lords of Flame, their work completed, returned to the Venusian evolution within the Earth scheme. Yet 7 of these Kumaras stayed, the chief of whom is called Sanat Kumara, or Melchizedek, also known as the Watcher, or the Ancient of Days. He presides over humanity until the last weary pilgrim struggles home. In other words, until the last of humanity achieves liberation. This was also the time of the establishment of the planetary center called Shambhala, over which Sanat Kumara presides.
The following table shows that Shambhala's establishment coincided with human individualization. The being whose body is our planet utilizes the human races for expression. Here again, we see our inseparability from deity, and that our evolution contributes to the greater evolution, and vice versa. In the table, we can see these chronological correspondences with the subraces and root races.
The humanity of that ancient time was enormous in stature, though evolution has been refining and decreasing in size up to our present day. Even over 4 million years ago, when the final destruction of Lemuria occurred, just before the first Atlantean destruction, there were still very large giants. Indeed, the statues of Easter Island that are about 30 feet or 10 meters high are representative of the height of the giants of that time. Of all the mammalians, man is the only one whom science does not allow to have dwarfed down like all other animal frames. A decrease in size is allowed from the dinosaurs to the present-day reptiles, but not for man. This is partly due to the so-called lack of evidence of physical skeletons, because of factors such as the action of sand on the ocean floor upon bones, or that cremation was universal up to 100,000 years ago. This will also be explored in depth later in this series. Because such a small time period of 6,000 to 10,000 years for human development has been assigned by contemporary science, it does not allow sufficient time to entertain the idea that giant humans gradually decreased in size over a period of millions of years in parallel with the reptile kingdom. In other words, in Lemurian times, humans were about the height of dinosaurs. Over the past 20 million years, reptiles and humans have decreased to the size they are today.
So the Hidden History of Humanity project seeks to document and visit many sites around the world where these relics and artifacts remain of ancient civilizations, such as Tiahuanaco in South America, Cuzco in Peru, Easter Island, the ancient ruins of Greece, and many ruins around the Mediterranean, their extent across the whole planet. In fact, this architecture is called Cyclopean pentagonal architecture, which are odd-sized blocks, but quite often with 5 sides, fitting perfectly into one another and creating earthquake-proof walls and buildings. And so we have many instances of ruins extant around the world that have this kind of architecture. For instance, in Mycenae in Greece, we have these marvelous ruins that look like they've been built by giants. And in fact, part of the Hidden History of Humanity project looks at the evolution of the human form from giants down to the size that we are today. And in fact, these giants built, in fact, we were talking about Cyclopean architecture, we're talking about the Cyclops, the legendary giants with the one eye. And these giants did exist back in Lemurian times and actually physically manhandled these enormous blocks that weighed many tons into position.
The Titans of old and the Cyclops, legendary three-eyed mortals, belong to the 4th Atlantean root race. All their subsequent legends and allegories are found in the Hindu Puranas, the Greek myths, and Homer, based upon hazy reminiscences of real Titans, men of superhuman, tremendous physical power, which enabled them to defend themselves and hold at bay gigantic monsters of the geological Mesozoic and early Cenozoic times.
In the mythology of the ancient Cyclops, the 3 giants with one eye are said to represent the last 3 subraces of that newly conscious Lemurian race. At the peak of physical development in Atlantis, they have been described as towering giants of godly strength and beauty, and the depositaries of all the mysteries of heaven and earth. The giants of both Lemuria and Atlantis were able to build large structures and lift enormously heavy slabs of stone, but also had at their disposal technologies that allowed stones weighing many tons to be lifted effortlessly. An imperishable record about the gradual evolution of the races has been left for us in the Bamiyan statues of Afghanistan. They were created during the Atlantean flood, when initiate adepts of Atlantis were taking refuge in the Central Asian mountains. The 5 different sizes of these statues are said to represent the height of the 5 root races in their enormous early etheric stages and in their later, still gigantic, and then smaller physical development.
The civilizations in Lemuria and Atlantis also had access to technologies based upon sound that was able to create a vacuum and lift these blocks effortlessly, these blocks that weighed many tons, or to transport them from many miles away to their particular sites, such as Stonehenge is a good example of this. And in many of the mythological stories in South America, in the Celtic countries of Europe, we find very similar stories of a magician or a sorcerer who transported these stones from many miles away effortlessly through the air. The transport of these stones may seem like a magical process to us, but to those who had the knowledge, it was simply about rendering the atoms within these stones weightless. And this is the science of magic. It's important for humanity to understand their true origins because we really don't know. Most people do not think about history. They have a vague sort of idea that we came from somewhere, came from apes usually. This is what is taught in high school. And we evolved from apes somehow into human beings. Well, the secret doctrine states the opposite, that in fact apes were a byproduct of human evolution that went wrong at one stage back in Lemurian times. It was not part of the plan of planned evolution. These beings, the so-called narrow-headed, I think Blavatsky gives one term, bred with animals that created monsters, all sorts of hybrids that were unintended for the evolutionary goal. Apes of today are descendants from some of these hybrids and monsters that were created back then, and are a reminder of the human transgression that took place back in Lemurian times.
According to occult doctrine, humans bred with animals in Lemuria, creating an unnatural and unplanned linking. The hybrid monsters created were the ancestors of our modern apes. At individualization, certain groups of souls refused to incarnate because they regarded the bodies at their disposal as too coarse. They were ultimately responsible for the groups of humans that caused this evolutionary anomaly, the so-called sin of the mindless. The modern-day orangutan is a peculiarly human reminder of that ancient transgression, and today, these apes are getting much publicity because their habitats are being destroyed in Indonesia through rainforest logging. When the unplanned inbreeding occurred with animals, the celestial guides immediately struck some groups with sterility in order to halt that which was not in the program of the divine plan. Can we imagine if this one fact of the secret sciences was considered? That apes were created by humans breeding with animals? What a dramatic revolution in consciousness would take place in how humanity views itself. Currently, in educational institutions, a 5,000 to 10,000 year history of the human race is taught, and that it evolved from apes. Humanity, however, has a much more divine and ancient pedigree. Madagascar was once part of the Lemurian continent and boasts dozens of species of lemur monkeys. Lemuria was originally part of a long prolongation of land, but the main continent extended from Madagascar in the west, encompassing India, Australia, and Indonesia, right across the Pacific Ocean, taking in Easter Island, Hawaii, and parts of the Americas. Australia is the largest surviving remnant of this once vast supercontinent. The fledgling humanity during early Lemuria was under the guidance of divine beings said to emanate from celestial spheres far higher than our own, giving instruction in building, agriculture, fishing, and language. These divine beings are the source of modern speculations that Earth has had many visits from ancient aliens. These same speculations tend to attribute everything to them, which is not necessarily the case.
However, the mighty ones performed their great works and left behind them everlasting monuments to commemorate their visits. Every time they penetrated within our veil of illusion, they appeared at the beginning of every great year, or precession cycle of 26,000 years. In ancient Chaldea, these beings were called the Kabiri, or Kabarim, meaning the measure of the heavens. In order to prepare suitable candidates for initiation, it was decided about 17 million years ago to build an organization and a headquarters for the mysteries.
Today determines the astronomical conclusion of one precession cycle and the beginning of another. Can we again soon expect visits from the mighty ones, or are they already here? The many daily occurrences of UFO sightings may well indicate them making observations of how humanity is responding to its opportunities. There is no doubt that advanced beings have always assisted humanity. From the first Kumaras of ancient Lemurian times, who taught building and agriculture, to the Kabiri, who have visited every 26,000 years to seed another impulse for the next cycle. Yet Earth evolution has seen the perfection of many of its own who have chosen to remain behind and guide humanity. The masters of the wisdom and the adepts of Shambhala have possession of the secret knowledge that lays behind the ancient lost technologies such as pyramid building, lasers, and anti-gravity flying craft. All of these technologies have been gifts to humanity from the mighty ones, whose origins may go well beyond the solar system to star systems, such as the Pleiades, Orion, or Sirius. Yet because of abuses of those gifts, these God-given things have been taken back, as a parent takes matches away from a child. The ancient wisdom has had a veil thrown over it, yet in the past century, that very same veil is starting to reveal what has been hidden for so long.
The revitalization of the ancient mystery teachings is extremely important at this time because it parallels the externalization of the hierarchy who have been behind the scenes watching over human evolution for the last 3 or 4 million years, and who of course are about to re-externalize again. So when the hierarchy re-externalize back amongst humanity, who will be walking amongst humanity, this has not happened for a long time. It will also be a catalyst for the reinstitution of the mystery schools, and where candidates for initiation can go to these mystery schools and learn the ageless wisdom, participate in group meditation, and prepare themselves as candidates for initiation.
Unlike ancient times, when the human race was guided by mighty celestial beings, the guidance now comes mainly from the secret adepts, those who have run the full gamut of human existence and become perfected, whose spirits have triumphed over matter and who can bend matter to their will, who now serve humanity by watching over and guiding their progress, allowing as much as possible for human free will to determine its own destiny. Yet this inner government of the planet surely interacts with and regulates the presence of extraterrestrial visitors. In our current fifth root race, there is an accent upon the perfection of the lower mind, somewhat to the exclusion of the more subtle senses of the intuition and the inner wisdom. Hence, we must be careful not to interpret ancient texts, symbols, and statues literally or too materialistically, especially if we lack an understanding of the subtle constitution of man. The ancients were far more poetic and artistic in their expression of the inner secrets. Many phenomena can be speculated to have origins beyond our earth, and indeed, there are some who look entirely through this prism. Yet many phenomena, if not most, are generally generated within the earth due to the law of cause and effect, or karma, and the rectification of natural laws and principles which govern earth life. In the days of Lemuria and Atlantis, humanity had not developed these marvelous technologies with their own minds. Today, however, we are just starting to recover some of those lost gifts through our own mental development that has evolved since those times. The mighty ones must surely be watching on with interest and readiness in case we look like destroying our planet through repeating past abuses.
So the reason for this series of documentaries is to really illustrate how the true history of humanity has unfolded and how humanity can be empowered by knowing its true origins and knowing where it stands today in time and space. And this will help people to make decisions about their future and to play their part far more consciously within the greater divine plan.